Please take your seats. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Good evening and welcome to Beth Yeshurun for what promises to be an engaging and informative program titled Antisemitism Online. My name is Jeremy Sorkin, and before we dive in, allow me to explain Kulanu. Kulanu is an ADL-inspired program seeking to better educate congregations throughout the U.S. on anti-Semitism and how to combat and report it. Beth Yeshurun is one of about 110 synagogues nationally participating in this high-value program. Kulanu empowers each member synagogue to craft their own programming to best fit their community's needs, style, and capability. We at Beth Yeshurun are fortunate to possess enough critical mass to construct a lay Kulanu planning committee with Rabbi Morgan playing an integral role in helping secure speakers and lead our live program, as well as Jennifer Rosenzweig to coordinate our advertising, operations, and all the behind-the-scenes details. I would like to also welcome anyone enjoying our program online via our streaming service, with a special shout out to Congregation Beth Yeshurun of the Woodlands. Lastly, I am excited to share details of two more Kulanu programs. First, on May 1st, we welcome Rabbi Kenny Weiss from Houston Hillel and Emory Head of School Stuart Dow to discuss anti-Semitism on campus. I am thrilled that BBYO and Kehila High will be encouraged to attend. We have designed a short ADL-led program catered to our teens specifically. Our final Kulanu program takes place May 15th with Rabbi Morgan sharing a conversation focusing on anti-Semitism in the New Testament with Matthias Henze, a professor of Hebrew Bible and Early Judaism at Rice University. It is unfortunate we still face a world with so much hate in general and anti-Semitism specific to the Jewish people. While some anti-Semites align with a far-right message, others spread their poison from the left or from governments or terrorist groups seeking to destroy Israel and Jews. Kulanu, which means all of us in Hebrew, seeks to empower all of us to combat and report all hate and anti-Semitism together. With that, I turn the evening over to Rabbi Morgan.
So again, welcome everybody. This evening's program, as we said, is going to focus on anti-Semitism and social media. And we have a wonderful panel of speakers this evening. We're going to start with Dina Marks from the Anti-Defamation League, the Southwest Regional Office. She is the Senior Associate Director. Her main responsibility at ADL is publicity, but she also serves as liaison with law enforcement, facilitates various training sessions, coordinates regional fact-finding, handles some discrimination complaints, staffs the International Affairs Committee and the Security Committee, and coordinates interfaith security issues for the region. Before joining the ADL, she wanted me to mention that she also worked at Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey Circus, which I guess means that you left one three-ring circus for another. So without further ado, let's hear from Dina. She's going to give us an overview of anti-Semitism and social media.
A very brief overview. Thank you so much, Rabbi Morgan. Yes, working in the media was a circus. And Ringling Brothers was a circus, and working in the media is a circus. I'm going to stand up because I have a PowerPoint, and I want to be able to see it. So I hope you don't mind me standing up. What I want to talk to you about is anti-Semitism, social media, and online extremism. But before I get into that, I just want to introduce my boss, Mark Tobin, the Regional Director of ADL, sitting there, and my lifelong friend and coordinator of Kulanu for us in the Southwest region, Lisa Stone, Goldenson Fellow of our ADL Southwest region. So, anti-Semitism and social media. I want to first give you a little bit of the lay of the land as far as anti-Semitic incidents are concerned. We recently released our audit of anti-Semitic incidents, which comes out once a year, and we found that anti-Semitic incidents have increased, or reports of anti-Semitic incidents have increased. 2021, the year before, had the highest number of anti-Semitic incidents ever since ADL started recording those numbers. But in 2022, we had 1,000 more than in 2021. So anti-Semitic incidents have increased dramatically over the years. We also found that anti-Semitic attitudes across America seem to have risen. So for a long time, even longer than we've been doing our audit of anti-Semitic incidents, we've been doing a study of anti-Semitic attitudes in this country, and we do it through asking questions about 11 anti-Semitic tropes. And we measure the amount of anti-Semitism by whether people agree with 6 of the 11 tropes, so more than half of those tropes. And you can see on the end here, let me see, my little pointer is working. No, it doesn't work with that screen. But you can see on the end here, 52 million Americans in 2022 agreed with 6 or more of the 11 anti-Semitic tropes. Not as high as in 1964, but it was sort of going down, and then all of a sudden it spiked up. So more than 1/5 of Americans agree with 6 of the 11 anti-Semitic tropes. So that tells you something right there. Drivers of anti-Semitism. All these things that I've listed up here for you are drivers of anti-Semitism. And if you look at all of them, wars, pandemics, demographic shifts, economic downturns, all of these things are things that we're going through right now and that we've gone through in the last couple of years. So what's driving this increase in anti-Semitism? This is part of it. Media, and I'm talking about mainstream media as they call it, has a big influence on attitudes, right? Mainstream media has a big influence on attitudes. It can influence what we do as a culture. It can influence attitudes. Social media expands that exponentially. Why? Because there's immediacy in social media. You can get information or disinformation out very quickly. There's ubiquity. It's everywhere. It spreads very rapidly. And there's anonymity. You can say something about somebody and nobody will know who you are. So people feel emboldened to spread disinformation on social media. That's driving what's going on also. Here's an example of some of the things that we found lately. So ADL has various centers that we talk about. One is our Center on Extremism, which monitors what extremists and haters do. We also have a Center for Technology and Society, which monitors what's going on online and tries to address these trends with social media platforms. So the Center for Technology and Society just let out a survey about Holocaust denial online. And not one of the 10 platforms that we analyzed, Twitch, YouTube, TikTok, Facebook, Discord, Twitter, all these platforms, not one of them got higher than a grade of C-. And that's because they don't respond to individuals who report policy violations online or report anti-Semitism online. They will respond better to what they call trusted flaggers. ADL is a trusted flagger. So if you report to one of these platforms and they don't respond, report it to us and we might be able to help you. But they're not doing a good job of responding. Now, there's certain reasons for that. These are reasons why it's hard for them to respond. Not giving them excuses, but there's a tremendous amount of content. And I have to look at my notes here because I want to make sure I say this right. There are 500 hours of video added every single minute to YouTube. Now, it's difficult to get your mind wrapped around 500 hours of video, period, right? But every single minute to YouTube. So how does YouTube monitor what's going up on their platform? So it's the amount of content. Anti-Semitism can be nuanced, and most anti-Semitism online is not overt. People don't necessarily, even Jews sometimes don't recognize anti-Semitism. So that's a problem. Moderation teams, which are trained to recognize policy violations, aren't always trained to recognize anti-Semitism, and it's hard to train them if everything is nuanced. And if humans can't recognize anti-Semitism and hate online, then certainly artificial intelligence, bots, aren't going to be able to recognize it, right? Also, there are laws that protect platforms. Again, I'm going to go to my notes here because I want to get it right. Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act has given companies immunity since the 1990s. It has protected providers and individuals from significant legal liability for illegal content posted online by other people. So if a third party posts something on a platform that's not posted by the platform, there's immunity for that platform. So laws will protect platforms. And of course, there's the profit motive. You know, if people are driven to your platform and see the ads on your platform, then you're making a profit. This is something that you would have seen online in May, around May of 2021, when Israel and Hamas had gotten into more of a battle. Anti-Semitism online increased dramatically, and also our anti-Semitic incidents, our audit received a lot more reports of anti-Semitic incidents during that period of time, and then there was more protests, more violent anti-Semitism out in the world. So driven by things like this that you might see online. I have a note about that too. Don't want to miss that one. There were over 17,000 tweets containing some version of the message Hitler was right during that month when there was that battle going on. So this is a slide that shows you how people have reported anti-Semitism and whether they've felt anti-Semitism online. I don't know if you can see, but in 2022, 40% said that they had felt anti-Semitism or had experienced anti-Semitism online, and 27% said that they had experienced severe online harassment, severe online anti-Semitic harassment online. That includes physical threats, sustained harassment, stalking, sexual harassment, doxing. Does everybody know what doxing is? I'm going to show you an example of that next. Some are saying yes and some are saying no. Or swatting. That's when they send like a SWAT team to your home. And that can be very, very dangerous. Here's an example of doxing. I was doxed by the Goyim Defense League, one of these groups of anti-Semitic people. They call me the Beak of the Week. My last name is spelled M-A-R-K-X, but they put it in the parentheses that say I'm a Jew, and with M-A-R-X, indicating that old trope that Jews are communists. And then over here, my age at the time, the year I was born, different names that I go by, my address, my phone number, so that if anyone wants to come to my house and do something, they can do it. That's what doxing is. Yeah, the information they put on there. Most of it was, not all the names that they put on there, but most of it was. They probably made up some of those names. How does this affect people? Well, people are affected deeply by this. It says here that about a fourth of the people who had experienced online anti-Semitism had trouble sleeping, and 11% had depressive or suicidal thoughts. So it affects people deeply. Of course, anti-Semites are very opportunistic. I know Dr. Hotez is going to talk a bit about this, but when COVID-19 became something that everyone was aware of, who's blamed for it in addition to the Asian and Pacific Islander community, of course it was the Jews, and these are a couple of memes that were found online by our Center on Extremism. So what do you do when you see something on a platform, somebody sends you something that's anti-Semitic? Certainly the most important thing you can do is report it. And we have, if you want to take a picture of this, we have a cyber safety action guide. If you go to that link, you will find not only different platforms and what their policies are, but ways that you can report whatever you've seen on their platforms. So we encourage everybody to report. There's a handout outside that I made which talks about how to engage or disengage online. Sometimes you don't want to engage with people, but there are times and ways to engage, and reporting it to the platforms directly is one way to do that. You might not get results from reporting. They may say, this does not violate our policy. Don't give up on that. You can appeal it. And the person who gave me this information, our Director of Anti-Semitism Education Programs, Vlad Kikin, has reported anti-Semitic language, violations of policies online before. He's been told that it didn't violate their policies, but he has appealed those reports, and he's gotten results from the appeals. So you can do that. You can also tell your friends to report it. There is power in numbers. So if you find something, tell 5 friends to report it, have them tell 5 friends to report it, and the bigger the numbers, the more they're going to listen to that information. If you don't get results, you can also report it to us, adl.org/report incident. As I said, we're a trusted flagger. ADL's a trusted flagger because of our Center for Technology and Society, and that will maybe get some results if you're not getting results by yourself. But by all means, and I put this in red because it's very important, if you feel you are in danger, if someone is threatening you, if you're being doxxed or swatted, take a screenshot and call law enforcement immediately. My longtime friend Al Tribble here, who's with the Secure Community Network, he's in charge of security for the Jewish community. That was an old bio. I'm sorry. I forgot to send Rabbi Morgan my bio, so he found one. So I don't do security anymore, but Al does. So you need to report it to him, and you need to report it to the Secure Community Network. But if you feel you're in danger, call 911 and report it immediately to law enforcement. Don't take any chances there. And if you need to contact me, that's my contact information. Do you want me to leave that up, take it down? It might
You can probably leave it up for now.
for now?
Yeah.
Okay. But that's it. I just wanted to give you an overview of anti-Semitic hate online.
So we're going to have an opportunity for you to ask questions. There should be cards that were handed out. If you don't have a card and you'd like to get a card, we can get a card to you to write it out. We're going to try and take only written questions, so, and we'll take those at the end of the program. So if you have questions, write them out and hand them in to somebody. We have a few people who are going to collect them, and we'll take those questions later. So our next speaker is familiar to many of you from watching TV during the COVID years. His name is Dr. Peter Hotez, and he was on TV quite a bit talking about the COVID disease and how to take care of yourself during the pandemic. He also worked on a vaccine that is now being distributed to third world countries to protect them from the disease. Peter Hotez is the Dean of the National School of Tropical Medicine and Professor of Pediatrics and Molecular Virology and Microbiology at Baylor College of Medicine, where he's also the co-director of the Texas Children's Center for Vaccine Development. Texas Children's Hospital Endowed Chair of Tropical Pediatrics. He's also a university professor at Baylor University and a fellow in disease and poverty at the James Baker III Institute for Public Policy. His CV actually could go on for pages, and you can read most of his a good selection of his CV on our website if you want more information. You may be wondering why we have a molecular biologist and virologist here on the panel, and unfortunately, he was sort of a triple threat. He is Jewish, he's a doctor, he was reporting about COVID, which many people didn't believe, and he developed a vaccine for it. And in case you don't know, Jews have been blamed for creating the disease and then creating the vaccine with a special microchip to track everybody. And so
I'm the trifecta.
Yeah. So now he's going to tell you about his experience in this area.
Well, thank you very much. I think I'll stand like Dina, and it's so wonderful to be with you, Dina and Al. They've been incredible sources of support, as has the rabbi, during some very difficult times. Let me speak for about 20 minutes, kind of giving you this overview of both the positive and negative side of this, developing a vaccine for the world, and yet at the same time being attacked for, as the rabbi pointed out, for being a Jewish scientist and a vaccine scientist as well. Let me see if this works. Yes, beautiful. So I call this talk On Anti-Science and Anti-Semitism. Intuitively, one would probably wonder how they're linked or why they're linked, but hopefully my remarks this evening will make it clear. So just to start out with, I grew up in West Hartford, Connecticut, the big Jewish community in West Hartford, Connecticut, and became a MD, PhD pediatrician and vaccine scientist because I thought making a vaccine was the highest expression of science for humanitarian purposes. I did my medical degree at Cornell in New York, my PhD at Rockefeller University. It used to be the Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research. That's where I'd met my wife 37 years ago. And I went to Rockefeller Institute, Rockefeller University. You know, the motto there was science for the benefit of humankind, and that's why I embarked on a career developing vaccines. And that thread has continued to the present day. To this day, I'm making vaccines for global health. I think the unexpected part was we had 4 adult kids, including Rachel, who has autism and intellectual disabilities. And if you're ever driving around the Montrose, we live in Montrose area, you can see this girl with a big shock of red hair walking to Goodwill in the morning. So she works at Goodwill on the corner of Westheimer and Shepherd, helping to sort clothes. And the original assertion from anti-vaccine groups starting 25 years ago were false claims that vaccines cause autism. So I wrote a book about my daughter called Vaccines Did Not Cause Rachel's Autism, which wound up making me public enemy number 1 or 2 at the anti-vaccine groups. And that was a disadvantage, obviously, but it also gave me a front row seat to understanding how disinformation groups work. And I became an expert not only in the vaccine science, but the vaccine anti-science. So I want to briefly tell you about that story this evening. So I'm based at the Texas Medical Center at Baylor College of Medicine and Texas Children's Hospital. At that time, Gary Rosenthal was chairman of the board of Texas Children's Hospital. Mark Shapiro was chairman of the board of Baylor College of Medicine. Paul Klotman was is the president of the college, and of course Mark Wallace. So in some ways I always feel like I've been recruited by the Jewish community to come here to Houston. And we set up this School of Tropical Medicine, but also this very interesting Center for Vaccine Development at the Feigen Center of Texas Children's Hospital, the big research building, with the idea that we're going to make the vaccines that the pharma companies are not in a position to make, because they're vaccines for diseases affecting the world's poorest people where there's no obvious means of financial return. The idea being harness the energy of the Texas Medical Center to make vaccines for the world's poor. And that was the attraction from coming to the Texas Medical Center, because no one else would roll the dice with us to do something like that. And which is sort of a fun side story. You know, when I was going on the cable news channels, CNN and MSNBC, you know how they would portray Texas. All they want to do is focus on all the wackadoodle. And I would put a lot of effort in explaining, wait a minute, I came to Texas to up my game for science and to be part of this medical center. So it's fun to tell that story. And the center now is co-headed by myself and my science partner for the last 20 plus years, Dr. Maria Elena Bottazzi. And we've been making vaccines for diseases you've never heard of, like schistosomiasis and hookworm infection and Chagas disease and leishmaniasis. And then around when we came to Texas, we also realized that coronavirus vaccines were orphaned. Nobody cared about coronavirus vaccines back then, so we started making those as well. So we started with, I don't know if you remember the original coronavirus, SARS, severe acute respiratory syndrome, and then Middle Eastern respiratory syndrome. And we were able to move on that pretty quickly, so that when the COVID-19 sequence hit, we were able to pivot our program and make that vaccine as well. And our technology that we use, we do mRNA and adenovirus vector vaccines and particle vaccines that everybody knows about now, but we also, whenever possible, try to be compatible with vaccine producers in low and middle income countries who actually band themselves together and call themselves the Developing Country Vaccine Manufacturers Network. There are about 40 of them in those little blue balls over there in Asia and the African continent, Latin America. And one of the most common vaccines they all make is they all make their own recombinant hepatitis B vaccine, which you probably gave to your kids or your grandkids. It's an older technology. It's been around a couple of decades. It uses microbial fermentation and yeast. So you grow it up in big biovats or bioreactors, almost like making beer. But instead of making beer, the yeast is actually making the recombinant protein. It's a vegan technology. It's cheap. You can make a bucket of it. And so our thinking is, if you're going to be compatible with vaccine producers in low and middle income countries, we're going to make a vaccine with that technology. And that strategy worked out pretty well, because this was what the world looked like in 2021, where it's a bubble map showing where nobody was getting their COVID vaccines. Not surprisingly, in the African continent, in India and Southeast Asia. And we were getting desperate calls from ministers of health and ministers of science in low and middle income countries, because they realized that the mRNA vaccines weren't coming. The adenovirus vector vaccines weren't coming. The particle vaccines weren't coming, because they were all new technologies, and there was a learning curve before you went from 0 to 14 billion doses. So that's what we started to do. So we worked out with Baylor licensing. We're not going to file any patents on this. We're going to put everything in the public domain, how we're actually making the vaccine. And we started doing the technology transfer. The one problem was we were not part of Operation Warp Speed, which was President Trump's vaccine program, because we're not a pharma company. So raising money was also an issue. But fortunately, it was the philanthropic environment in Texas that made it possible. So we were able to get money from the Clayburgh Foundation, the King Ranch, the Dunn Foundation, the MD Anderson Foundation. We got $2 million from Tito's Vodka. So not that I'm endorsing alcohol consumption, but should you have a vodka cocktail tonight when you go home? You don't want to drink the Russian stuff anyway, right? So Tito's came through, and which is another interesting story about Texas. If we hadn't moved to Texas, there was no way we would have made those COVID vaccines. And we then embarked on technology transfer, so our own version of Texas vaccine diplomacy. And if you've ever done work with Asian and African countries, you know what that means. It's 4 a.m. Zoom calls, 5 a.m. Zoom calls, because you want to get to them by close of business their time. So, my day would start at 4 or 5 in the morning, and then at that time, I was ending my day talking to Don Lemon on CNN and Lawrence O'Donnell on MSNBC, and so I didn't sleep for 3 years, but we transferred the technology, the production cell bank, and we did it to 4 countries so we would do due diligence to make sure they knew what they were doing, because we didn't want to give it to someone who would screw it up, because then it would ruin the reputation of the vaccine. So we sent it to India, Indonesia, Bangladesh, and Botswana. And India was the most advanced. It was an organization called Biological E that makes a lot of vaccines already, and they scaled up to produce it. And then we transfer the ownership, so they own it. We don't try to hang on to it. This idea of decolonizing the vaccine ecosystem. So in India, the vaccine is known as Corbevax. BE stands for Biological E, and it's now the primary. It's the major vaccine they use for kids. 75 million doses went into kids, and 10 million adult boosters. So 85 million doses. So we kind of provide a proof of concept that you don't have to be a pharma company to still do big things. You have to be in Texas to do big things, but you don't have to be a pharma company to do big things. So the idea is not to demonize the pharma companies either. They do a lot of good, but the point is you need an alternative model as well if you're really going to be committed to equity. And then we did the same with Indonesia, and they made Indovac. And with Indonesia, it was interesting because they were interested in getting this certified as a halal vaccine. Because our technology is a vegan technology, no animal cells, human cells, animal protein, human protein. I guess it could be kosher too, right? But they were interested in having it as halal. So the Indonesians came into our labs, confirmed that every source was non-human or non-animal, and it got certified as the first halal COVID vaccine. So I guess the punchline is it took the Jewish guy to make the halal vaccine for the Muslim world. Tikkun olam, right? So that was very moving. Now we're making the bivalent booster as well. That's the good news part of the story. The not so good news part of the story is this, that, with all of the social disruptions from COVID-19, we've kind of fallen behind on our ability to vaccinate kids and adults for everything else. So measles and whooping cough and tetanus, there's been big disruptions, and it's not bouncing back like it did. So the World Health Organization, I was in Geneva towards the end of last year, has put out this very ambitious agenda called the WHO World Health Organization Immunization Agenda 2030, with the idea that we've got to fix the break, the tear in the matrix, the break in the ecosystem. And unfortunately, it's starting out in a pretty rocky way. That for the first time now, the percentage of kids who are getting their vaccinations has dropped globally, and the number of fully unvaccinated kids has risen precipitously. So this is the concern, that it's happening in part, and that's me in the monk painting over there, that it's happening because of this rise in global anti-vaccine activism. So what I want to do is just briefly end by explaining what that actually means, because people don't quite understand that the anti-vaccine ecosystem is not just misinformation or the infodemic, as we call it. In fact, it's organized and deliberate. So it started, so these are the different versions of the anti-vaccine movement that began around 25 years ago and then has become more politically organized over the last 2 decades. So I just want to end taking you through version 1.0, 2.0, and 3.0. So version 1.0 began in the late 1990s, and that's how I got involved, where the false assertion that vaccines cause autism. That thread is still with us today, but then around 10 years ago, version 2.0 took hold around this concept of medical freedom, health freedom. You can't tell us what we want to do with our kids, and now it's globalized. So let's just go through 1.0, 2.0, and 3.0. So 1.0 is, even within that, there's a lot of nuance of which vaccine they claim causes autism. The first assertion was that it was the MMR vaccine, the measles, mumps, rubella vaccine, and that was a paper that was actually published in a scientific journal, The Lancet, in 1998. That was retracted, but it gave rise to this idea, and the scientific community responded in a big way by doing large studies showing that kids who got the MMR, the measles, mumps, rubella vaccine, were no more likely to acquire autism than kids who didn't. But that didn't stop them, because over time, and this gets to Dina's remarks, these anti-vaccine groups started monetizing the internet. They were making money. They were selling phony baloney autism cures. They were selling nutritional supplements. If you go to Amazon.com and type in books on vaccinations, most of them are anti-vaccine COVID conspiracy books, so they're monetizing Amazon.com. So they weren't taking no for an answer. So they kept on switching up the assertion of what actually they said was causing autism, and it was all fake. Then it was thimerosal preservative that used to be in vaccines. Then it was spacing vaccines too close together, alum in vaccines. And each time the scientific community would respond by debunking it and showing it's not the case, but it was hard to keep up. And this idea of, it's kind of this Pyrrhic game of whack-a-mole. You knock one down, another one popped up, or moving the goalpost. And then for a while they pivoted to the HPV vaccine for cervical cancer and other cancers. They said it caused infertility. How many people have heard COVID-19 vaccines cause infertility? Yeah, that's where they got it from. They just copy-pasted the phony assertion onto that. And that's how I got involved. This is me with Rachel on the upper left. She likes to go to Cafe Brazil on the weekend. And then because we live in Montrose, and I wrote the book, Vaccines Did Not Cause Rachel's Autism, which does a pretty deep dive explaining why there's no link, but also what autism is, how it begins in early fetal brain development through the action of autism genes. We actually did whole exome genomic sequencing on Rachel and my wife Ann and I to find Rachel's autism gene. The point is there was an alternative narrative. And that's when I really began to get targeted a lot and to seek Dina's help, because, in fact, one of the lead anti-vaccine activists, who's unfortunately RFK Jr., on his Instagram began calling me the OG villain, which I had to look up because I'm so old and square. It means original gangster villain. So your rabbis invited the OG villain to come and speak to you today. But I think it helped, and I think it took some of the wind out of their sails. But the anti-vaccine groups re-energized in a way I would have not have thought of, and it started in Southern California, but it amplified in Texas. And so what happened was around a decade ago in Southern California, so many kids were not getting their vaccines that there were breakthrough childhood infections. And the first one you often see is measles, because measles is the most transmissible. So they had a large measles epidemic in Southern California, 2014, 2015. The California legislature said, you know, enough, we're going to shut down vaccine exemptions from now on. If you want to send your kids to school, they have to be vaccinated. And I supported that and thought it was the right thing to do, but it generated a backlash. And the backlash was around this concept of health freedom, medical freedom, saying, hey, you can't tell us to do what we want to do with our kids. And unfortunately, it found a home in Texas. So Texas became the epicenter of the anti-vaccine movement around this concept of health freedom, medical freedom. And it got support, unfortunately, from the Republican Tea Party. Empower Texans, basically, they started getting PAC money, feeding it into anti-vaccine groups. It made absolutely no sense, but that was the reality. And so we got up to almost 100,000 kids not getting their vaccines in the state of Texas. And that didn't say anything about the 300,000 homeschooled kids in Texas. What percentage of those you think are not vaccinated? What percentage of the homeschooled kids you think are not vaccinated? 10%? Half? It's a trick question. We don't know they're homeschooled. How do we know? We have no idea. But it's a lot of kids. And that's what we're living with right now, because what happened is then Texas became the mecca, and leaders of the anti-vaccine movement started coming to Austin to demonstrate against vaccines. And so this is one of the lead anti-vaccine activists, and you can recognize the pink granite on the state capitol. And what's he wearing? He's wearing a yellow Jewish star. It's offensive as hell, right? And it's got the word no vax written in Hebrew looking like letters, right? So basically comparing vaccines to the Holocaust and using a lot of Holocaust imagery to describe vaccines. And that's where and I'm going to come back to that, because that's where you started to see the anti-Semitism link in a very odd way. But this is what's taken off now in Texas during our time of COVID-19. So this is the paper I just wrote for the Public Library of Science. It's called The Great Texas COVID Tragedy. And it goes something like this. If you look at those Texans who lost their lives during the COVID pandemic, so almost 100,000 Texans died during the COVID pandemic, 94,000. And so Texas was the worst affected state, tied with California, but California is 40 million people, Texas 28 million. What you see is the following. So what I'm showing you are the peaks and valleys of deaths from COVID-19. I don't know if this is the pointer here. Oh, here it is. Maybe it doesn't work very well, but it doesn't matter. So the first peak on the left is the original lineage in the summer of 2020. Then the next one is the alpha wave in the winter of 2021. I'll hold off on the green arrow for a second. Then to the right of it is the big delta, that horrible delta wave in the last half of 2021, and then the BA1 Omicron wave. So these are the peaks and valleys of death. That green arrow signifies May 1, 2021. That's the date the Biden administration announced that there was enough vaccine freely available that anyone who wanted to get a COVID vaccine could. And if you looked at countries such as Australia or Canada, after the equivalent of their green arrow, the deaths halted. In Texas, the deaths kept on going because so many Texans refused to take a COVID vaccine. So almost half of the deaths, half of those 94,000 deaths, were unnecessary deaths because people refused a COVID vaccine that was more than 91% protective against severe hospitalization and death. And on a national scale, I put that number at 200,000, almost all in southern states, Texas, and a few Mountain West states. And now we're starting to understand why. And this is the hardest part, the second hardest part to talk about. The first part is the anti-Semitism. The next hardest part is this. The deaths occurred overwhelmingly among a partisan divide. So if you look at the deaths on the right there from that Delta wave, And this is from Charles Gaba, the health analyst, David Leonhardt of the New York Times, Axios, National Public Radio, the Kaiser Family Foundation, the Pew Research Center, all have reproduced this. Overwhelmingly, the deaths were in red states, red meaning Republican, blue meaning Democrat, and the redder the county, the lower the vaccination rate and the higher the death rate. So much so that the New York Times just calls it red COVID. And another way of representing this, these are the deaths that after May 1, 2021, in the red states versus the blue states. This is and the right is the vaccination rates on red versus blue. And for me, this is the hardest thing I've ever had to talk about, because all of my training as a physician and scientist said, you're not really supposed to talk about Republicans and Democrats and liberals or conservatives. We're supposed to be politically neutral. But what do you do when the deaths are so overwhelmingly among a partisan divide? It's not that I care about your conservative values, even extreme conservative values, but somehow we have to delink it from the anti-vaccine rhetoric. And we know why now. We know why because at the CPAC conference in Dallas in 2021, we all heard it. First, they're going to vaccinate you, then they're going to take away your guns and your Bibles. And as ridiculous that sounds to us, 40,000 Texans died because they accepted that. Or you had the House Freedom Caucus, specifically put out anti-vaccine rhetoric, or Marjorie Taylor Greene, who would call people like me medical brown shirts because we're vaccinating people, using Nazi paramilitary analogy. Or Senator Johnson from Wisconsin, who would hold vaccine injury summits, all fake. And then amplified every night on Tucker Carlson, Laura Ingraham on Fox News. This is documented by Media Matters, a media watchdog group based out of Washington, as well as a research group out of the Federal University of Technology in Zurich, Switzerland. Every night for that terrible Delta wave, when 40,000 Texans died, Laura Ingraham, Tucker Carlson, every night filling their broadcasts with anti-vaccine content, falsely discrediting vaccines, saying they weren't safe or effective. And it killed people. And the question is, how do we manage that, I think, remains one of the big unanswered questions. Here it is again. This is from Charles Gaba. These are the deaths that we started with in 2021, a little bump in the blue states and the red states. They just amounted massively, all unnecessary deaths, all unforced errors. So, and the reason we have to care is because this is a killing force. And when we talk about societal causes of death, looking at suicide or road traffic accidents or gun violence, anti-science activism is right up there with any of those things, and yet we don't frame it as such. So, so I would get emails like this, and this is when I began talking with Dina. It didn't start out necessarily with anti-Semitism, but it was coming from the far right. So you had the Proud Boys marching at anti-vaccine rallies. It made no sense. So I would get this: "Dear doctor," I use that term loosely, "Hotez, you print one more paper or blog suggesting the roundup of free citizens, health freedom concept, to get an unproven, untested shot that is no more a vaccine than an M&M is." This is a vaccine that's 90% protective at saving your life. "I will suggest to all my patriot friends that you be hunted." So this was the rhetoric I was getting. The army of patriots is coming to hunt me down. And to which I said, right now it's just me and Ann and Rachel and the cat. You don't need a whole army of patriots, One patriot, two patriots maybe, but you get the idea. And then the anti-Semitism. So I've written about this now. I had a hard time getting it published, because where do you publish something like this, right? That's not a typical thing for a biomedical journal. Finally, the Maimonides Medical Journal took it to really look at this. And the anti-Semitism came in two parts. The first part was the overt stuff, and that the ADL talks about a lot. So this is from the ADL website, right? That this is who's making the vaccines. The Jews are making the vaccines for profit. So they target Borla, the CEO of Pfizer, who's Jewish, and they target me. So that's a big piece of it. Also that we invented the virus, right? So this is the imagery that we're cooking up the virus in a laboratory, and so we get that a lot. But more commonly, it's this kind of stuff, which is using a lot of Holocaust rhetoric to describe vaccines and COVID prevention. And some would say, well, that's not necessarily anti-Semitic, but I think it is, because they know I'm Jewish, so they specifically target me with this kind of rhetoric. So I'll read a couple of things. This is from the paper. It says, Peter, 75 years ago, people like you were tried, convicted, and hung by the neck until dead. There is a lawyers' committee right now collecting the names of people to be indicted for Nuremberg crimes. So again, vaccines or the Holocaust for Nuremberg crimes. I am turning your name over to the prosecutor's legal team. Dear Dr. Hotez, we will be blessed with your presence at the trial for those who have committed crimes against humanity. I hope you develop a conscience before it's too late. How does it feel to be a medical fascist? Why do you lie? You're one disgusting man. You peddle fear and obsession with vaccines is gross and creep. You sick son of a kosher pickle eater. That's an interesting one. Right? You are killing millions, perhaps billions, with your pro-genetic engineered vaccine propaganda. You know it will give you autoimmune disease and early death. I hope you enjoy maggots, because when you die and are burning in hell, that's the only companionship you will have. And then a lot of Mengele, and they love their Nazi analogies. So a lot of comparisons between me and Mengele. If you don't afford others free speech, again, the health freedom idea, which I don't know where they get the free speech. They seem to have a lot of free speech. You deserve none yourself. You're not a scientist, as much an insurgent, an enemy of the United States Constitution, a living Mengele. I hope to see the day that you and your fifth column colleagues, so a lot of equating Jews with communists, which is interesting. You will get what Ethel and Julius got, wet and 10 times over. And the guy even signs his name. I mean, that was an easy one for Dina to handle. Dear doctor, ready to tell the truth. I know everything. Justice is on the way for you, scumbag. And odd cartoons of Jews trying to entice people to get vaccinations, and good Aryan people that they are get duped, and then there's revenge. And so this is the new book that'll come out this summer. It's called The Deadly Rise of Anti-Science, A Scientist's Warning. It's produced by Johns Hopkins University Press. It was a tough book to write, again, because there was nothing pleasant to write about. And again, a lot of the book talks about how do you even have this discussion? How do you talk about politics when all of your training says you're supposed to be politically neutral, or to paraphrase Elie Wiesel, when neutrality, favors the tormentor, favors the aggressor. And now it's extending globally. So now this is halting all vaccination programs globally. We're seeing return of measles, mumps. So the whole vaccine ecosystem is now being disrupted all over this phony baloney stuff. So let me stop there, because I want to hear from Al, and thank you so much.
So again, if you have any questions, we have cards for you to write them down on, and we'll be answering questions. And I just want to mention one thing, that I suppose one way to is what you said about decoupling. I think is an important thing. It's if we're to decouple this particular aspect, if it's related to a particular party more than one or another, to just decouple it from the rest of what the party is saying, right? So. We're just talking about that one aspect of things. Maybe that's one way to help address that issue.
Yeah, I mean, this is the effort, right? I mean, there's nothing, as I say, there's nothing inherently anti-science about the Republican Party, right? Abraham Lincoln started the National Academy of Sciences. The Eisenhower started NASA. George W. Bush started PEPFAR, the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, and I worked with the Bush administration on neglected tropical diseases. So this is something kind of new and twisted, right?
Yeah, right. Okay, so our third speaker now is Al Tribble, who is retired now from the Federal Bureau of Investigation, having spent 27 years of service. He was a supervisory special agent. In his past, in his post at the FBI, his team investigated civil rights, human trafficking, and violent crimes against children. He specialized in investigating hate crimes and color of law violations, human trafficking, and infringement of access to healthcare clinics. He now works for the Houston Jewish community as part of the Secure Community Network. The Secure Community Network is a national organization, a Jewish one, that's established to provide special security for Jewish communities across the country. And they are helping to provide security specialists for major Jewish communities. And we are very, very fortunate that Al Tribble is our Secure Community Network agent. In his role, he administers a security program that provides consultations, building and organizational assessments, training, drills, and threat mitigation to Jewish organizations, including schools, daycare centers, synagogues, camps, assisted living facilities, and other Jewish facilities in the Houston area. If you haven't met Al Tribble before, this is a wonderful opportunity to meet him. He is our protecting agent for the Jewish community here. So without further ado, here is Al.
Thank you, thank you. Good evening. I'm going to try and dispel some myths. They say FBI agents have no sense of humor. When you work these sort of violations, you have to find humor in something. I'm going to ask you and indulge you to respond to some questions. I know we've just met, but I'm going to ask you some personal questions. Show of hands, who has stayed in a hotel in the last 7 days? Anybody? Okay. 2 questions that you ask when you go into the hotel. Is my room ready? And what's the Wi-Fi password? Am I right? Is there anything else? We cannot escape social media or the internet anywhere we go. We've heard about the statistical rise in incidences across the country, even in Houston. It's just no one aspect we can put our finger on to say, this is why this is happening. But we have to take a concerted effort to mitigate what is happening, what we're seeing. What we've seen fit to do is partner. The Jewish Federation of Greater Houston and the Secure Community Network. Show of hands, how many have not heard of Secure Community Network? It's okay, raise them high and be proud about it, because I worked for 27 years with the FBI and never heard of Secure Community Network, okay, until I retired. Secure Community Network, better known as SCN, are a group of state, local, federal law enforcement agents, analysts, intel specialists that are the best in the professions that they have left, and that they now have one mission, and that's the safety and security of the Jewish community in North America. They have been in operation since 2004, and yet those many folks don't know about them. I never knew about them. It's a great partnership because the Federation here in Houston is a convener and a connector of individuals with their religion and with Israel, and they've seen fit to say, you know what, we need to employ a strategy, a methodology to combating this rise in anti-Semitism. And that's exactly what they're doing. My focus when I was with the Bureau was 300 different federal violations, okay? Now I've got that laser focus on trying to keep the Jewish community safe and the things that we offer. One thing you would notice, if I took you to Chicago and walked you into the headquarters of the SCN building, took the blindfold off you and asked you where you were, you'd look around and you'd probably say CIA headquarters. I mean, the technology that they have to help combat this growing problem is phenomenal. They've got television screens all throughout the room monitoring social media outlets. They have intel analysts monitoring social media channels, scouring the internet for threats related to the Jewish community. It's an amazing network of individuals and technology that there is to help keep us safe. You'd be surprised. There are things that I couldn't do. Now, you do know this, though. How many of you have a cell phone? Okay. You do know I can tap your cell phone, right? You do know that? Anybody not know the FBI can't tap your cell phone just like that? Anybody not know that? I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Don't record this, please, okay? I need a affidavit, got to get a warrant to hear that cell phone. I've got to get a warrant to look at your social media. Not so at Secure Community Network. What we have the ability to do is geofence locations like this tonight. And what that geofence does is we can publicize over the internet that we're going to meet here tonight from 8 to 10. There's going to be approximately 200 people. It's going to last the duration of that evening. And I can tell my colleagues in Chicago, I want you to scour the internet for any talk about someone trying to disrupt that event, whether it's going to be violent or whether they're just saying bad things about it. I want to know about it so I can be proactive in threat mitigation. I could not be proactive with the Bureau. It was a lot of reactive work. And so what I can do is a lot of proactive work. That's one good thing about SCN. What I can impart to you this evening is we've heard about these terrible numbers, right? The rise in anti-Semitism. There's some things that we can do and things that we must do individually and as an organization to help keep us safe. I talked about a methodology to help combat anti-Semitism. What does that mean? Well, training such as this, an opportunity to understand how we can keep ourselves safe, our communities safe, our organizations safe, through training, through planning and preparation, okay, through analysis, threat analysis. We see an awful lot of different varieties of anti-Semitism online. You've probably seen the three most famous ones, banner drops. Anybody know banner drop? You've heard of banner drops? These, I'm going to be nice, individuals stand on overpasses of crowded freeways and they spew this anti-Semitic verbiage so people driving by see it. Also, flyering incidences. You're familiar with the flyering incidences. These people will take a baggie, fill it with corn or rocks, and an anti-Semitic message, which is just hideous, that no child or adult should read. Sometimes they're graphic, and they'll leave that on your lawn, in your driveway, on your doorstep, by the hundreds, okay? The latest craze, which I still can't believe is even happening, is how could you project an anti-Semitic message on a message board of a corporation's building for hundreds of people to see? They're doing this. And I say, you know what? We need a strategy to mitigate this sort of behavior and activity. And that strategy is combining resources to combat that sort of thing. What we've seen right here in Houston, I want to kind of put something in perspective. How many of you drove here tonight? Okay. How many were fortunate enough to have been driven here tonight? Okay. How many of you are going home to a residence or someone's residence? Okay, well, that's a good thing. That's a good thing. And I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to just yell it out. I know we just met, but I want you to just tell me what you think. Where is the safest place to be statistically and not be a victim of a hate crime? Who said police station? You are absolutely wrong. I like that. Nah, I'm sorry. I always wanted to be a comedian. I never made it. Police station, that's a good guess, though. Anybody else? Embassy? Maybe not. Maybe not. Good guess, though. Good guess. They've got good security there. But statistically, space station? I haven't got the latest numbers in, but that's a good one. That's a good one. All right, on Earth, folks, the safest place. I like that one. I like the way you think. Who said home? Who said home? Okay. Please don't ever repeat that. That's not the safest place, okay? It's a good, you would wish, one would think the home is the castle, right? But that is not. That is like top 5 places where you're going to be victimized, okay? I'm going to give you some information. I'm going to tell you this, but it's sad. This was statistically the safest place to be and not be victimized by a hate crime, but it is no longer. And you guys are much too nice. Just looking at you, reading your body language and your faces, I know you know nothing about it. It's a bar. A drinking establishment, okay, was the safest place to be and not be victimized by a hate crime, but no longer, okay? There is somewhere else that is safer than a bar. Evidently, alcoholics are now turning on each other, okay, for racial and religious reasons, okay? And some of you in here have one of these. I know you do. Who said storage facility? You've seen this before, right? You're absolutely right. A storage facility is the safest place statistically to be and not be victimized by a hate crime. So my thought process is sell your homes and move into your storage facilities, okay? But that is the safest place to be. No internet at the storage facility, but you know what? The internet is everywhere else. Okay? It's everywhere else. There's another thing I want to clarify. I think we need to talk just for a moment about hate crimes and hate incidences. Because who would agree with me that you come outside, you look on your doorstep, and you see this hateful literature on your property? Anybody hate crime? Anybody think that's a hate crime? It should be, right? But guess what? Unfortunately, we can't get there yet for a hate crime. And so we need to differentiate between what is a hate crime and what is a hate incidences. We have far more hate incidences in Houston and around this country than we have hate crimes. Now, I know I've heard this before. I know some of you have heard people say it. I know you would never say it, but I've heard someone say, it's a crime to be that ugly. They weren't talking to me when they said it, but I've heard that said before, right? So when I hear that, I say, well, what is a hate crime? Number one, it's a criminal offense. It's a criminal offense that's motivated by some sort of bias, whether it's race, religion, disability, ethnicity, gender, okay, gender identity. That's what a hate crime is. So when you talk about, I've got hundreds of packets of hateful literature. Someone drove by and yelled this hateful verbiage to me as I was walking on my street. Hate incident. I hate to say that, but that's what it is. It's an incident because what's the offense going to be if there's hundreds of leaflets on the ground? Anybody? Littering. Do you think the Assistant United States Attorney is going to take a case of littering, or the DA's office? They're not, just in case you thought they would. But I ask you, what is the most effective means of combating hatred and anti-Semitism? Education, absolutely. I'm with you with education. Now, what is going to change people's behavior or modify their behavior? Because the government is behind it. Legislation, okay? Now, I'm not saying we legislate everything, but if you look back in history, okay, Civil Rights Act of '64, Voting Rights Act, Hate Crimes Prevention Act, all of these things were enacted because of behavior. Well, some of you can remember this. Back in the 90s, there were dozens of churches being burnt to the ground, okay? And people were saying, oh my goodness, they're attacking houses of worship. But it wasn't just one denomination, okay? Like they target synagogues. It was multiple denominations. And people were saying, this has got to stop. Is it domestic terrorism? What is it? And folks didn't know for months why these churches were being burnt to the ground until 2 college students were caught and confessed to burning down these churches because they thought it was funny, okay? It wasn't a hate crime, but it was certainly behavior that needed to be modified, and out of that came the Church Arson Prevention Act, okay? Now, what I would love to see is the Anti-Semitism Flyering Act of 2023, which makes it a felony to drop more than 3 flyers in a neighborhood at any given time that contains verbiage that is offensive in sight or sound if read aloud. There needs to be some sort of legislation. I believe they are working on something that would make that a criminal offense, okay? So that's one means of trying to combat what is going on. A lot of things that I attribute to some of this anti-Semitism are on the internet, and I hate to say this, but there are Hollywood actors and actresses, there are professional athletes that have more followers than there are Jewish worshipers in the North America. And they'll get out there and they'll make a statement that millions of people will listen to. And I have no bones about calling Kanye West's name, but after his announcement, you had hate groups who, a lot of them don't even like black people, were saying, "Ye is right." And I'm like, are you kidding me? This sort of behavior is just unbelievable that someone could do that. Now, I'm going to ask you a question. I'm going to bare my heart to you and tell you, you want to know what scares an FBI agent? Anybody? Nobody wants to know? Okay, I won't tell you if you don't want to know. Nothing. No, I'm just kidding. No, what scares me as a retired FBI agent is to see a public official get in front of millions of people and make a biased remark, anti-Semitic remark, in passing, and think it's okay, and not apologize, and marginalize millions of people in their verbiage. That's what scares me, because I know what's coming next. What they've just done is embolden a whole group of people, young and old, that think it's okay to do this sort of thing. That's what frightens me. And in order to combat that, the strategic, methodical approach to combating anti-Semitism has to be taken. We have to get law enforcement professionals that are groomed in investigating racial and religious motivated bias activity on board to take a look at the threat landscape. You all individually have to take ownership of the threat landscape that is out there. And this, I call this training, education. We just told you the numbers are striking in what we're seeing in the numbers for harassment, vandalism, assaults. It depends. You can tell me a city and I can tell you, oh, that's assaults. And here in Houston, it's pretty much flyering incidences, phishing emails where, hey, this is so-and-so, do you have a moment to chat? You gotta be very careful with your email because you're talking about social media. People are looking at your email, trying to get information so they can send you a virus or corrupt your information or steal from you. It's unbelievable that we've had synagogues actually targeted for fraud. And I was thinking, it's bad either way, whether it's anti-Semitism or whether it's fraud, but it's like, okay, we've got the king of Nairobi is trying to get into your accounts here at Congregation whatever. But we have that sort of thing, and it's going across the internet. We have other schemes where folks are using the internet to target individuals and institutions. And it's going to take all of us to kind of look at our own situational awareness. And one of the things that Secure Community Network has done, one of the things that the Jewish Federation of Greater Houston has done is said, you know what? We need to educate the clergy, the congregation, the employees, and let them know what to look for. The three most dangerous things that you're going to encounter are people, cars, and the things that they are doing. That's what we have to start looking at when we are going just to the store, back and forth to work, to home. Those are the things that you need to look for. Social media, we have to be cognizant of what is happening in Israel. It's not on our street or down the street, but you know what? People are looking at that and they're exploiting what is happening and they're taking it out on innocent people, okay? So we have to understand the threat landscape and act accordingly, educationally. And so far as, I'm not pushing guns on anybody, but you have to consider security, armed security for your synagogues. You have to consider your own personal security as it pertains to situational awareness, okay? And what Secure Community Network offers is run, hide, fight. There's training that says, hey, we've got circumstances that will help your situational awareness through this training. That is partially what I do. The other is I'll come look at a synagogue and I will make recommendations to this room. Does anybody know in the room right now which way east is? You better know that. You better know that, right? Okay, good. But my point is, when you go to your favorite restaurant, ask yourself the same question. Ask yourself, do you know how to get out of that restaurant without leaving through the door you came in? Can you do that? Ask yourself, does this place have Wi-Fi? No, don't do that. You all know you'd never use the Wi-Fi at the airport to charge your phone, right? I hope you know that. Don't lay your phone, I'm not kidding now, I like to joke, but don't lay your phone on those charging pads in the airport. They can corrupt your phone, and it's another way of phishing, stealing information from you, just like the social media aspects of what is going on. I don't want to belabor the point, but I know where I was 10 years ago, almost to the day. Anybody else know where they were 10 years ago to the day? You know? Oh, awesome, awesome. Boston Marathon, okay, that's awesome, that's notable. Okay, anybody else? I'm gonna tell you what I was doing 10 years to the day. 10 years to the day, Dina and I were working an investigation that involved an individual that said they were going to bomb a synagogue here in Houston. Congregation Beth Yeshurun, Congregation Urami. This individual was caught, did federal time, thanks to the investigators, thanks to me, and the judicial system. The indictment came out April 13th, 2013. So I'm looking back that far, and I say, my goodness, anti-Semitism, targeting a synagogue because he had been listening to an extremist named Farrakhan who incited him to do what he did. And 10 years later, we're still looking at people that are spreading hatred and inciting individuals to do things like that. I'll leave you with this last point. How do we do better as a community, as an individual? And it's by what Dina said, reporting incidences. You've got to report. You have a community security director in Tribble now. There is a website, houstonjewish.org/security. You can complete an incident reporting form and let us know any incidents of anti-Semitism, as well as reporting it to the ADL. You've got two modes of opportunity, but it's going to take a coordinated, collaborative effort to drive these numbers of anti-Semitism down. So I thank you for your attention.
Well, thank you. So I just have, I think, time for just a couple of questions. So one of the questions I thought was interesting was, and this could be generalized, one of the platforms with a lot of anti-Semitism is Reddit. I imagine there's other ones as well. But people post all kinds of stuff, including good information on these places. How do you flag this content? How does ADL, does it monitor and try and submit corrective information? I guess we'll start with Dina on that if you.
Yes, we monitor information. We have research fellows and analysts who monitor information like this. We report that kind of information. We count on you to report it. You know, the first part of the question was, how do we report? Well, that cyber safety action guide gives you a lot of information about how to report. If that doesn't work for you, then call us, contact me, and I'll do my best to help you report. But that's what you do. You go to the platform, find out how they report, but the cyber safety action guide is kind of a one-stop shop for reporting to the platforms directly. But as Al said, you can also report to SCAN, you can report to ADL, you can report to law enforcement if it's something that you think merits that.
I guess that sort of falls under the category, if you see something, say something. So you're on Reddit, you see it, report it to the ADL, right? So then you're the eyes out there watching and seeing what this is. Because there's millions and millions of these things being posted every second, right? No one person can keep track of everything, but if you see something, then you can report it yourself. Have there been any cybersecurity issues with Jewish agencies, let's say in the last few months or year or whatever? Cybersecurity incidents?
At least reported to Secure Community Network, there haven't been any large cyber incidences. I'd say the closest thing we've come to a cyber incident is an organization or an individual indulging in a phishing scam for information, which they came close to getting a synagogue to send a check to somewhere else other than where it was supposed to go, but they caught it, but nothing cyber related. But that's a cause to say your cybersecurity, your firewalls, your vulnerability as it pertains to your software needs to be current and up to date.
And has the ADL website ever been hacked or attacked?
Well, there's nothing that I can remember recently that's happened like that, and I can't remember really any specific incident where anything really big happened. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, well,
We have a lot of protections, though.
Yeah, that's true, yeah. Okay, well, thank you all for coming. Let's thank our panelists over here for a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
We have some refreshments out in the back so we can hang around and mingle a little bit. And don't forget, in 2 weeks, we have another program.